Today was supposed to be a defining moment in my career. After years of late nights, missed weekends and back-to-back campaigns, I was finally getting the recognition I deserved. The promotion to vice president of marketing at one of the largest financial firms in the city was mine. I'd earned it through sheer determination and strategic execution. The elevator timed as the doors slid open onto the executive floor. My assistant, Sarah, was waiting with a bright smile and a folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Olivia," she said, following me into my corner office. "Morning," I replied, placing my handbag on the sleek glass desk. "The CEO called. He wants to personally congratulate you before the announcement at the corporate event tonight." I smiled faintly. Not surprising. The merger was a win for everyone. Sarah lingered, hesitating slightly. "Also, have you heard about the new legal consultant?" I barely glanced up from the folder I was opening. "No." "Why?" "Claire Reynolds. Transferred from the New York office. Word is she's brilliant. And young. And..." I raised a brow. "And people are talking about how much attention she's getting from the partners. Including Ethan." I froze for half a second before recovering. "Ethan talks to people. It's his job." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Of course. Just thought you'd want to know." I brushed it off with a polite smile, but the slight pressure building in my chest was impossible to ignore. Ethan and I had been married for 5 years. We were the power couple, the kind of pairing that people envied. He was one of the youngest partners at Callahan and Morris, a top corporate law firm. I was a rising star in the financial sector. We were supposed to be the perfect match. Smart, ambitious, successful. So why did I feel like something was wrong? I shook the thought away and focused on the task at hand. That evening, the corporate gala was held at the Parkview Hotel's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the room as champagne glasses clinked and the sound of polite laughter filled the air. I stood near the bar, wearing a fitted navy gown that matched the sophisticated tone of the evening. My colleagues smiled and congratulated me as I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Ethan was late. Not surprising, he was wrapping up work on a complicated merger at the firm. I checked my phone. 8:45 p.m. He should have been here by now. Then I saw him. Tall, dark hair swept back, tailored tuxedo fitting his lean frame perfectly. His smile was polished as he navigated the crowd with practiced ease. He spotted me and made his way over, pressing a brief kiss to my cheek. "Sorry I'm late," he said, slipping an arm around my waist. "You look incredible." "It's fine," I replied automatically. "You've been busy." He smiled, but his eyes were distracted, scanning the room. My eyes narrowed slightly. "Who are you looking for?" "No one." His hand tightened briefly on my hip. "Just taking in the room." Then I saw her. Claire Reynolds. She was standing near the balcony, a glass of champagne in hand. She was tall and blonde, gorgeous, really, wearing a red satin dress that clung to her figure like it was made for her. She was talking to another associate, but her gaze flicked toward Ethan. And he saw her too. The look between them lasted a fraction of a second too long. It was subtle, the slight shift in his body, the brief tightening of his jaw. My chest tightened. "She's new, isn't she?" I said, keeping my voice light. Ethan's expression remained neutral. "Claire? Yeah. She transferred from New York. She's young. Talented too." His smile was thin. The firm practically begged her to come on board. And that was it. No further explanation. No effort to reassure me. I took a slow sip of champagne, watching Claire as she turned and walked toward the balcony. Ethan's gaze followed her before he forced himself to look back at me. I smiled tightly. "No big deal," I told myself. "You're imagining things." But deep down I already knew better. The shift was subtle at first. Ethan started staying late at the office more often. "Merger work," he said. He became more guarded with his phone, setting it face down at the dinner table when he never used to care about notifications. Conversations grew shorter. Less intimate. He kissed me goodbye in the morning, but it felt more like habit than affection. One evening I was sitting on the couch in our living room, scrolling through emails when Ethan walked in, dropping his briefcase near the door. "Late night again?" I asked. "Yeah. The merger's been complicated." I watched him move toward the kitchen, where he poured himself a glass of whiskey. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly rumpled. Claire must be helping a lot, I said carefully. Ethan's back stiffened. He took a long sip of whiskey before replying. She's part of the team. That's not an answer. He sighed and turned toward me. Olivia, you're reading too much into this. My heart squeezed painfully. A week later he announced he had to go on a business trip. 3 days in Chicago for merger-related meetings. He never used to travel much for work. You don't think this is happening too fast? I asked, sitting at the edge of our bed as he packed. I can't control the pace of the merger. He smiled faintly. It's part of the job. I nodded. But my instincts screamed otherwise. It happened 2 days later. Julia called me at work. Have you seen the article? What article? I frowned. Julia's voice was sharp. The business section. Page 6. I opened my laptop and clicked through the business headlines. There was legal consultant Claire Reynolds spotted with partner Ethan Caldwell, romance rumors swirl. My heart stopped. The photo was unmistakable. Claire and Ethan walking into the Chateau Hotel in Chicago together. Claire was laughing and Ethan's hand was resting at the small of her back. The timestamp was from the night before. I felt my breath quicken. The edges of my vision blurred. I closed the article, hands trembling. Julia's voice was in my ear. Olivia. I'm fine, I said mechanically. I wasn't fine. Ethan came home late that night. He smelled like whiskey and faint perfume. You're up? He said, pausing at the doorway. I saw the article, I said quietly. Ethan froze. What article? Chicago. The hotel. My voice remained calm, almost too calm. Care to explain why you were at the chateau with Claire? She's part of the team, he said quickly. You already said that, I replied coldly. He hesitated. Then sighed. It's not what it looks like. My blood chilled. Then explain what it is. He opened his mouth but no words came. I stood slowly. I'll make this easy for you. Ethan's eyes widened slightly as I brushed past him. Olivia. I paused at the door. If you think I'm going to fall apart over this, I said coolly, you don't know me at all. I walked away, my heels clicking on the polished floor. He thought he was breaking me. He had no idea what was coming. I didn't fall apart. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not when Ethan kissed me on the cheek before heading to work as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. The weight in my chest was no longer pain. It was steel. Cold hard steel. By the time Ethan walked out the door, I had already showered, dressed, and was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. My coffee steamed beside me as I stared at the screen, my mind sharp and calculating. I had always thought strength meant holding a marriage together through difficult times. But now I understood that true strength meant knowing when to walk away, and making sure the person who wronged you paid the price for their betrayal. I clicked open a secure browser window and typed in the contact information Julia had sent me last night. Weston Investigations. The phone rang twice before a steady male voice answered. Weston Investigations. I need to hire a private investigator, I said, my voice cold and clear. Today. Of course. How can we help? I smiled thinly. I need to know everything about Ethan Caldwell and his mistress. Weston Investigations worked fast. Within 48 hours I had more proof than I'd ever wanted. Surveillance photos showed Ethan and Claire meeting at discreet hotel bars after work. Their bodies angled toward each other, Ethan's hand brushing Claire's lower back. A series of hotel receipts confirmed they weren't just meeting for drinks. The PI even managed to intercept text messages. Last night was incredible. I miss you already. I wish I could stay longer. Olivia's getting suspicious. We'll figure it out soon. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I read through the texts with clinical detachment. I felt no tears, no anger. Just a growing sense of control. I printed everything and stored it in a manila folder. Then I took the folder to the top drawer of my office desk and locked it. My mind was already formulating the next step. If Ethan wanted to act like he was single, I would make him single. And I wouldn't leave him with anything in the process. Legally, this case is cut and dry, said Madison Wright, my divorce attorney, as she skimmed through the evidence. Madison was a woman in her 40s with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper legal mind. She was known for handling high-profile divorce cases, usually with devastating consequences for the guilty party. Infidelity is difficult to prove, Madison continued, flipping through the photos. But you have text messages, credit card charges, and photographic proof. That's more than enough. And the prenup? I asked. A smile curved at the corner of Madison's mouth. It's generous. Ethan had insisted on the prenup when we got married. He said it was to protect us both. But Madison's gaze sharpened as she read through the clauses. He must have been very confident you'd never cheat, she said, raising a brow. Because the infidelity clause is brutal. For him. What does it say? If you can prove that he had an affair, you're entitled to 50% of his assets. I smiled. 50%? That's not all, Madison added, her voice light. Since his name is on the mortgage for the house, you could also claim it. And what happens to him? Madison's eyes glinted with professional pleasure. He'd lose his partnership. The firm has a strict code of conduct about interoffice relationships, especially with subordinates. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling the satisfying weight of power shift into my hands. And Claire? Well, Madison smirked. If this goes public, she'd be fired. That's the kind of scandal that follows you around for a lifetime. My smile widened. Perfect. The best revenge is served cold, and with precision. I didn't confront Ethan. Not yet. That would give him too much power, too much room to explain or spin things to his advantage. Instead, I became the perfect wife. I made him coffee in the morning. Asked about his day. Sat next to him on the couch while he checked his phone, his face tightening when he realized it was still unlocked. You've been so busy with work lately, I said one evening, my hand resting on his knee. Do you need a break? We could take a trip. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Things are really intense at work right now. Oh, of course, I replied, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Work comes first. That night, I checked his phone again while he was sleeping. More texts from Claire. Can't stop thinking about last night. Miss you already. He was sloppy now. Careless. Too confident that I was still blind. Good. Let him think that. Let him think he was winning. The corporate gala was the perfect opportunity to set the trap. Ethan had insisted I attend with him. It was a black tie affair, hosted by Callahan and Morris to celebrate the successful merger. I wore a sleek black dress cut low at the back and red lipstick that matched the Louboutin heels on my feet. My hair was in soft waves down my back. I walked into the room with Ethan's hand resting lightly on my lower back. And then I saw her. Claire Reynolds. She wore a gold dress that was just a little too tight, standing too close to Ethan's colleagues. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, then narrowed. I smiled at her. Claire. She blinked. Olivia. You look lovely, I said smoothly. I can see why Ethan enjoys working with you. Her smile flickered. He's mentioned me? Oh yes. Often. Ethan stiffened next to me. Olivia. I turned toward him, my smile serene. Why don't you go get us some champagne? He hesitated. I gave him a pointed look. Go on. He left reluctantly. Claire's eyes followed him across the room. You know, I said lightly, turning back to her, I've always admired women who aren't afraid to go after what they want. Claire's smile sharpened. Well, Ethan and I work closely together. Yes. I'm sure it's very close. He knew I knew. And yet she didn't back down. That was fine. This game had only just begun. That night, while Ethan slept, I sent an anonymous email to Callahan and Morris's HR department. The subject line was simple. Inappropriate conduct between senior partner and subordinate. I attached the photos, the text messages, and the hotel receipts. I blind copied the managing partners. Within 24 hours, the firm launched an internal investigation. Ethan came home pale and stressed. They're asking questions, he said over dinner. Someone filed a complaint. Oh. I replied. About what? About Claire and me. I sipped my wine slowly. That's odd. Why would they think there's something going on? He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Maybe it's because of those long business trips, I suggested. Or the late nights. He paled further. Olivia. I smiled. Relax, Ethan. If there's nothing going on, you have nothing to worry about. His face went tight. Checkmate. Claire was fired by the end of the week. Ethan was put on paid leave pending the outcome of the investigation. I made sure the details of the affair leaked to the right people in the corporate world. Discreetly, of course. I met with Madison the following day. "The divorce papers are ready," she said, handing me a folder. I opened it, scanning the terms. Asterisk 50% of assets. Asterisk full ownership of the house. Asterisk a clean split of all joint accounts. "When should I serve them?" Madison asked. "Soon," I said. "Very soon." That night, Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, his phone pressed to his ear. I knew he was talking to Claire. His face was drawn, the stress weighing on him. I smiled. He thought this was bad? He hadn't seen anything yet. Ethan was unraveling. It was delicious to watch. He thought he was still in control. He thought the worst had already passed. He was wrong. He was so wrong. A week after Claire was fired from Callahan and Morris, Ethan came home looking pale and drawn. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of whatever damage control he was trying to manage. "They're talking about suspending me," he said one evening over dinner. "Oh," I replied, cutting a piece of steak with surgical precision. "Why would they do that?" "There's evidence," Ethan said, his voice strained. "Someone sent HR pictures and texts. I don't know how." "Oh, Ethan," I murmured. "That's awful." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't seem very surprised." I took a delicate sip of wine. "Well, you have been spending a lot of time with Claire. People notice things." His jaw tightened. He leaned forward. "Olivia, did you have anything to do with this?" I smiled faintly. "Why would I? I'm your wife, remember?" That word, wife, seemed to scrape against his conscience like glass. He was starting to suspect the truth. Good. It was almost time for the final blow. The annual Callahan and Morris Gala was the social event of the year, an elegant black tie affair where the city's most influential lawyers and business leaders gathered beneath crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne and exchanging business cards. Ethan hated events like these, but this year he was desperate to save face. His suspension was still pending investigation, which meant he wasn't technically banned from attending. "We need to present a united front," he said, adjusting his tie in the mirror as I finished getting dressed. I slid into a deep red gown, silk, with an open back that hugged my figure perfectly. I secured a diamond bracelet on my wrist and pinned my chestnut hair into an elegant chignon. "You look stunning," Ethan said. "I know." He smiled tightly, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. He needed me tonight. He needed to look stable, successful, untouched by scandal. Which made it the perfect time to rip the rug out from under him. The ballroom at the Parkview Hotel was already full when we arrived. Heads turned as we entered, because of Ethan, yes, but mostly because of me. My hand rested lightly on his arm as we moved through the crowd. "Olivia." Ethan. The managing partner, Charles Bentley, approached with his wife in tow. "So glad you could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," Ethan said, his smile tight. "Ethan's been under a lot of pressure lately," I added with a sympathetic smile. "This merger investigation has been so difficult." Charles's gaze sharpened slightly. "Yes. It's unfortunate. I'm sure it will all work out," I added smoothly. "Ethan's reputation speaks for itself." Ethan gave me a warning look, but I kept my smile in place. Then I saw her. Claire Reynolds. She had the nerve to show up. She wore a gold dress, shorter than was appropriate, and her hair was pulled into loose waves. She spotted Ethan almost immediately and smiled. I watched Ethan's whole body tense. She walked toward us, eyes gleaming with artificial confidence. "Ethan," she purred. "So good to see you." I felt Ethan's arms stiffen beneath my hand. "Claire," I said, my tone sweet as honey. "I didn't realize you were still invited after, well, everything." Claire's smile tightened. Ethan stepped in quickly. "Olivia." "Oh, I'm sure everyone here already knows," I said, looking at Claire with a pitying smile. "After all, the press has been very thorough about the details of your relationship." Claire's expression darkened. "I don't think this is the place." "Why not?" I said innocently. "You had no problem conducting the affair in public. Surely a few more people knowing won't bother you." Claire's eyes widened in alarm. Ethan stepped closer. "Olivia, stop," he hissed. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, I'm just getting started." Dinner was served an hour later. I sat between Ethan and Charles Bentley. Claire was seated across from us, her eyes darting toward Ethan every few minutes. The tension at the table was palpable. Ethan leaned toward me. "Olivia. Please. Let's get through this night." I sipped my wine, studying him over the rim of the glass. "Of course, darling." Charles tapped his glass with a spoon. "Before we start dessert, we'd like to recognize a few individuals whose contributions this year have been exceptional." Ethan sat straighter. This year's largest merger was handled primarily by Olivia Caldwell. The room applauded politely. I smiled, acknowledging the attention with a slight nod. "And of course Ethan Caldwell was instrumental in providing the legal support for this merger," Charles continued. "Despite recent complications." The air in the room thickened. Whispers stirred at the edges of the room. I knew what was coming next. One of the firm's junior partners stood up suddenly and approached Charles with a folded piece of paper. He handed it over silently. Charles read the paper, his face tightening. Then he stepped back toward the microphone. "There's been a development." Ethan's face paled. Effective immediately, Ethan Caldwell's position as partner at Callahan and Morris has been terminated. A collective gasp swept through the room. Ethan stood, his face tightening in disbelief. "What?" "The board reviewed evidence of misconduct," Charles said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "An internal investigation confirmed a breach of our code of conduct." Ethan's eyes whipped toward me. My smile was small and sharp. Claire was frozen, her eyes wide. "Furthermore," Charles added, "Ethan's termination will be followed by a public statement to ensure the firm's reputation remains intact." The room was utterly silent. Ethan's face turned white as he stumbled backward from the table. "This is a mistake," he said hoarsely. "It isn't," I said quietly. His gaze swung toward me, wide and desperate. "What did you do?" he whispered. I stood. "Nothing you didn't deserve." Claire's hand brushed Ethan's arm. He shoved it away. "Claire Reynolds," Charles said next, his expression stony. "Your contract with the firm is terminated, effective immediately." Claire's mouth fell open. But I didn't." "You violated the company's code of conduct," Charles said bluntly. Claire turned to Ethan. "Do something," she hissed. But Ethan was already looking at me. As he knew. He knew exactly what had happened. Checkmate. Ethan caught up with me outside the ballroom. "Olivia, wait." I turned slowly. "Yes." His face was flushed with humiliation and anger. "How could you do this?" "You did it to yourself," I said calmly. "I just made sure everyone saw it. You destroyed my career." "No, Ethan. You destroyed your career when you thought you could have it all." He took a shaky breath. "Claire didn't mean anything. I made a mistake." "I know." I smiled faintly. "And now you're paying for it." He exhaled sharply. "We can fix this." "We can." "No, Ethan." I reached into my clutch and pulled out an envelope. He froze as I handed it to him. "What is this?" "Divorce papers." His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. His face darkened as he read the terms. 50%, he choked. "Your prenup was very generous," I said smoothly. "Madison made sure of it." His mouth tightened. "You'll ruin me," he said hoarsely. I stepped closer. "Good." Claire stumbled out of the ballroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Ethan." Ethan didn't even look at her. "You should probably find a new job," I said to her. "I hear waitressing is easy to get into." Claire's face flushed with humiliation. Ethan turned back toward me. "You won't get away with this." I smiled as I walked away. "I already have." That night I fell asleep in our king-sized bed, alone, and slept better than I had in months. Ethan had always been good at maintaining composure. That was one of the things that had drawn me to him in the beginning. His control, his ability to keep his emotions contained even in the most stressful situations. He always knew how to stay 2 steps ahead of everyone else. But not anymore. The morning after the gala, Ethan came home looking like hell. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, and there were deep shadows beneath his eyes. I sat at the dining table, calmly sipping my coffee as the sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse. The divorce papers sat in a crisp manila envelope on the table in front of me. Ethan dropped his keys onto the glass surface with a sharp clink and raked a hand through his dark hair. We need to talk. I didn't look up. We already did. Olivia. His voice was hard now, the polished, charming tone slipping beneath the weight of panic. You blindsided me. I smiled faintly. Did I? He sat down across from me, his hands clasped together as he leaned forward. This divorce, it's a mistake. I finally raised my gaze to meet his. No, Ethan. You made the mistake. He exhaled sharply. Claire didn't mean anything. It was a lapse in judgment. I arched a brow. A lapse that lasted 6 months? He stiffened. You think this is going to hurt me? He said, his eyes narrowing. You think you can just take half of my assets and walk away clean? Yes. You're not going to win. I smiled. I've already won. 2 days later, I met with Madison Wright at her downtown office. I've filed the paperwork, Madison said, flipping through the documents on her desk. The evidence you collected made it airtight. No judge is going to side with him. What's his response? Madison's lips curled with professional amusement. He's stalling. His lawyer requested an extension. Of course he did. But it won't help him, Madison continued smoothly. The terms are clear. He'll lose half of everything: cash, investments, properties, and the house. I nodded. Good. Madison's eyes sharpened. He's going to try to come at you emotionally. He'll manipulate you. I know. Madison leaned back in her chair, studying me. And you're ready for that? I smiled. I'm counting on it. Ethan called me that evening. I ignored it. He called again. And again. Finally, after the 5th call, I answered. Ethan. Can we talk? We're talking now. Face to face, he said. Please. I hesitated. Then, fine. Come by tomorrow night. He showed up at exactly 8 p.m. I opened the door wearing silk loungewear that skimmed my figure. My hair was down and my makeup was carefully undone. Ethan's eyes darkened slightly as his gaze traveled over me. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He hesitated before walking inside. The penthouse was immaculate, decorated with sleek modern furniture and abstract artwork. It was the kind of space that reflected success and quiet power. I handed him a glass of whiskey and settled into an armchair. He sat across from me, running a hand over his face. I miss you, he said quietly. I arched a brow. Do you? I made a mistake, he admitted. I got caught up. Claire. He shook his head. She was never you. That's true. His gaze sharpened. We've been through too much to throw this away. You threw it away the moment you walked into that hotel with Claire, I replied coolly. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. We can fix this. No, Ethan. You can't fix this. His mouth tightened. It's the money, isn't it? I laughed softly. You think this is about money? You want the house. Fine. Take it. Take half the accounts. Just don't do this. I set my glass down with a soft clink. I don't want the house, Ethan, I said. I just don't want you to have it. His face hardened. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I smiled faintly. A little. You're not this kind of person, he said, his voice sharpening. You're right, I replied. I wasn't. But you made me this way. Ethan didn't give up easily. He started showing up at work, waiting for me outside the building. You can't keep avoiding me, he said one evening. I'm not avoiding you, I replied. I just have no interest in wasting my time. I loved you, he said suddenly. I turned toward him slowly. You loved me. Yes. And yet you were fucking Claire. His face twisted. It didn't mean anything. I smiled coldly. It meant enough for you to lose everything. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You're not being reasonable. Reasonable? My voice sharpened. I stood by you for 5 years. I sacrificed for you. I supported your career. And the moment I was succeeding more than you, you went and found yourself a pretty little distraction. His eyes burned with frustration. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I smiled thinly. You wanted someone who would make you feel like a man again. Because you couldn't handle that I was outpacing you. His jaw flexed. I'm not the bad guy here. You're not the victim either. I stepped closer until my heels clicked against the polished floor. You thought I was weak, I said softly. You thought I would cry and beg and let you keep me like a trophy. Olivia. But you forgot who I am. I smiled. And now you get to remember. 3 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. Ethan sat across from me in the courtroom, his lawyer by his side. His face was drawn and pale. He looked tired, smaller somehow. The judge reviewed the terms one final time. Do you agree to the terms of this settlement? The judge asked. Ethan hesitated. His gaze flicked toward me. He was hoping for mercy. He would get none. Yes, he said finally. The gavel struck. It's done, Madison said, smiling as we left the courthouse. Ethan followed me into the hallway. Olivia. I turned slowly. He stood there looking lost. Broken. You really did this, he said hoarsely. Yes. You've ruined me. I smiled. No, Ethan. You ruined yourself. Claire wasn't with him. I'd heard through the corporate grapevine that she had left town after the scandal broke. No firm in the city would hire her now. You didn't have to be so ruthless, he said. Yes, I did. He stared at me for a long moment. I'll get back on my feet, he said darkly. I'm sure you will. I started to walk away. Olivia. I paused. Do you still love me? I smiled coldly over my shoulder. I loved the version of you I thought you were, I said. But this version? My gaze sharpened. No. And I walked away. 3 days after the divorce was finalized, I moved into a sleek downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline view. Lisa brought over a bottle of champagne to celebrate. To freedom, she said, raising her glass. To choices and consequences, I replied. We clinked glasses. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I miss you. I made a mistake. Can we talk? I deleted it without replying. And for the first time in years I smiled, truly smiled as I looked out over the city. Ethan was in the rearview mirror. And my future was wide open. Ethan didn't take losing well. Men like him rarely do. The settlement was clean, airtight, thanks to Madison's precise legal work. Ethan had lost half of everything, including the house. He was forced to move into a modest apartment in a less glamorous part of town, the kind of place he used to scoff at when we first started dating. He lost his partnership at Callahan and Morris too. The firm issued a carefully worded statement about unprofessional conduct and violating company policy. Ethan was never mentioned by name, but everyone knew. In the legal world, reputation was everything, and Ethan's was in tatters. Claire had disappeared almost immediately after the scandal broke. According to Julia, she'd been spotted working as a waitress at some second-rate diner on the outskirts of the city. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her bed, now she could lie in it. While Ethan's life was crumbling, mine was soaring. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer, a position that came with a corner office, a salary bump, and a seat at the executive table. I launched a new campaign that exceeded every quarterly target within the first month. My name started circulating in the business world, not because of the divorce scandal but because of my strategic wins in the corporate sector. People started noticing me for the right reasons. You handled it brilliantly, Madison said over lunch one afternoon. We were sitting at a rooftop restaurant downtown, the skyline glittering beneath the afternoon sun. It wasn't difficult, I replied, sipping my martini. Madison smiled. Oh, but it was. Most women would have folded under that kind of betrayal. I'm not most women. Clearly. Madison's smile sharpened. By the way, Callahan and Morris reached out. My brows lifted slightly. They want to offer you a retainer as a corporate consultant. My smile widened. Ethan's old firm? The very one. How poetic. You're going to take it? Madison asked. Of course. Ethan had lost his place at the table. And now they were offering that seat to me. Poetic indeed. I didn't hear from Ethan for a while after the divorce was finalized. He was too busy trying to salvage the wreckage of his career. Rumor had it he was working for a smaller firm now, handling contract disputes and minor corporate cases. A huge downgrade from his previous high-profile clients. He was trying to rebuild himself. And failing. But I knew it was only a matter of time before he reached out. Men like Ethan always come back. Once they realize that no one else will tolerate their bullshit. And I was right. One evening I was sitting in my new penthouse, curled up on the velvet sofa with a glass of red wine, when my phone buzzed. Ethan asterisk. Asterisk I miss you. Can we talk? Asterisk. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. 5 minutes later he called. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. Finally I answered. Olivia. His voice was low, almost pleading. What do you want, Ethan? I made a mistake. You said that already. Can we meet? I smiled faintly. What for? I need to see you. I hesitated for just a moment, then said, fine. My office. Tomorrow morning. Ethan arrived at my office promptly at 9 a.m. the next day. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. He looked thinner, his jaw more hollow than the last time I'd seen him. His usual polished confidence had been replaced with a kind of quiet desperation. I sat behind my sleek glass desk, dressed in a fitted black dress with red heels. My hair was pulled back into a smooth bun. Ethan, I said coolly. Take a seat. He sat. His eyes scanned the office. My office, taking in the view of the city skyline behind me. The corner office, the executive status. It was all his once. Now it was mine. Look, well, he said carefully. I am well. I've been struggling, he admitted. I know. He hesitated. Claire left. I arched a brow. Oh. She couldn't handle the fallout, he said bitterly. Blamed me for everything. She's not wrong. His jaw tightened. I know that now. There it was, the glimmer of humility. The vulnerability he'd never shown before. I need to ask you something, he said. I leaned back in my chair. Go ahead. I want another chance. My smile didn't waver. You're joking. I'm serious. His eyes darkened. I made a mistake. I let my ego get in the way. I miss you. No, you miss the version of me who tolerated your bullshit, I said evenly. His eyes sharpened. We were good together. No, I corrected. I was good. You were just lucky. Olivia, please. His voice dropped into a pleading tone. I know I screwed up. But we can rebuild. We can start over. I stood, heels clicking against the marble floor as I moved toward him. Start over. I repeated. After you humiliated me in front of half the city? I was stupid. Yes, you were, I cut in smoothly. And I've already forgiven you for that. He blinked. You have. Yes. I smiled thinly. Forgiveness just doesn't mean reconciliation. His face darkened. You're serious. Deadly. His eyes hardened. His jaw clenched. You think you're untouchable now? I know I am. He stood, his shoulders tense. You won't win forever. I smiled. I don't need to. I already won. He lingered for a moment, searching my face for some hint of weakness. He found none. Then he left. 3 days later Julia called me. You're not going to believe this, she said. Ethan was arrested. For what? Fraud. I sat up. Explain. Apparently Ethan tried to close a shady deal with a private investor, Julia said. The investor reported it to the authorities. Callahan and Morris are distancing themselves fast. I smiled faintly. It's over, I murmured. Looks like it. Julia's voice sharpened. And Claire. She was named in the report, Julia said. Accessory to fraud. I laughed softly. How poetic. 2 weeks after Ethan's arrest I attended the annual corporate gala. Alone. I wore a sleek black gown with diamond earrings. Heads turned as I walked into the room. I wasn't Ethan Caldwell's wife anymore. I was Olivia Caldwell, the youngest CMO in the city. A rising star in the business world. As the night wore on, I found myself standing near the balcony, sipping champagne when Daniel Morgan approached. Daniel was a senior executive from one of our partner firms. He was tall, confident, with piercing blue eyes and dark hair. He'd always been friendly with me over the years, but there was something different about his expression tonight. You look stunning, Daniel said, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. Thank you. I heard about Ethan, he said carefully. I'm sure everyone has. Daniel smiled. The thing is, you seem better without him. I am. Daniel hesitated, then said, Can I take you to dinner sometime? I studied him thoughtfully. Yes. Daniel smiled, his eyes glinting. Ethan was the past. My future was standing right in front of me. It's funny how quickly life can change. 3 months ago I was Ethan Caldwell's wife. A supporting character in his perfectly curated life. The woman who stood quietly beside him while he soaked up the admiration and accolades. Now I was the one standing in the spotlight. My name was featured in Business Weekly's Top 40 Under 40 list. The article called me one of the most influential business strategists of the decade. My face was splashed across glossy business magazines and financial columns. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had always believed that I owed part of my success to him. His contacts, his advice, his influence. But now, standing at the top on my own, I knew the truth. He had never been my stepping stone. He had been my anchor. And now that I had cut him loose, I was soaring. The call from Callahan and Morris came a week after Ethan's arrest. I was sitting in my office when my assistant, Sarah, poked her head in. You have a call from Charles Bentley. I raised a brow. Interesting. Put him through. The line clicked. Olivia, Charles said smoothly. It's been a while. Not that long, I replied. Charles chuckled. Fair enough. Listen, we've been following your success with the merger. The work you've done with the international expansion. Impressive. Thank you. We'd like to formally offer you a retainer as a strategic consultant for the firm. I smiled faintly. You're offering me Ethan's job? Better than Ethan's job, Charles said. We're offering you a seat at the table. A seat at the table. Ethan had fought for years to gain that seat, and lost it because of his arrogance. And now they were handing it to me. I'll need to review the terms, I said smoothly. Of course. Charles's voice was warm. But we'd be thrilled to have you on board. I'll let you know, I said. I hung up and sat back in my chair, a slow smile curling on my lips. I had taken everything from Ethan. And now I was walking through the door he'd slammed shut behind me. The first time Ethan showed up at my new penthouse, I almost didn't answer the door. But curiosity got the better of me. He stood in the hallway looking thinner, paler. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. He wasn't the polished, confident man I had once known. Olivia, he said. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What do you want? He ran a hand through his hair. We need to talk. We don't. Please. His voice dropped. I'm in trouble. I smiled faintly. I know. Claire's gone, he admitted. She left. Took what was left of my savings. How tragic. I can't get hired anywhere, he said bitterly. Nobody will touch me after the scandal. You're a lawyer. Adapt. You think this is funny? He said sharply. Not funny, I replied. Predictable. He rubbed the back of his neck. I lost everything. And whose fault is that? I get it, he said, his voice tightening. I screwed up. But we were good together, Olivia. I laughed softly. Good? Is that what you think? We were a team, he insisted. No, Ethan. I was the team. His eyes darkened. You don't have to enjoy this. Oh, but I do. He took a shaky breath. I need your help. My gaze sharpened. You want me to save you? I can't rebuild from this alone, he said desperately. I stepped closer. His eyes brightened with hope. Asterisk, stupid man. Asterisk. You want me to lift you back up? I whispered. Yes. His hand reached toward mine. I smiled coldly. Not a fucking chance. I closed the door in his face. Daniel Morgan showed up at my office 2 days later with coffee. You're spoiling me, I said as he handed me the cup. You've earned it, Daniel replied with a smile. Daniel had been circling me carefully for months. He was patient, respectful, but unmistakably interested. Are you free tonight? He asked. I studied him. A quiet, easy confidence that contrasted Ethan's smug arrogance. Maybe, I said coyly. He smiled. Dinner. Convince me. New French place, he said. Hard to get a reservation. I raised a brow. And you got one? I know people. Fine. I smiled. Pick me up at 8. Daniel showed up exactly on time. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, and his cologne was subtle but rich. He held out his hand as I slid into the passenger seat of his Aston Martin. The restaurant was quiet and intimate. Low lighting, white tablecloths, attentive service. Daniel ordered a bottle of Bordeaux. The conversation was easy, natural. He asked about my work, not out of politeness but genuine interest. I heard about Ethan, Daniel said carefully as the waiter refilled our glasses. Oh. Daniel's mouth curled. Well, it's hard not to. His fall from grace has been the talk of the corporate circuit. How embarrassing for him. Daniel chuckled. You don't seem too broken up about it. I'm not. Daniel's gaze sharpened. You're ruthless. I'm strategic. Daniel smiled. That's even more dangerous. I leaned toward him slightly. Can you handle that? Daniel's eyes darkened. Try me. The next day Ethan showed up at my office one final time. He looked worse than before, dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled. I just wanted to say goodbye, he said. Goodbye. I'm leaving, he said. Moving back to Chicago. Can't handle the humiliation? His jaw flexed. It's over for me here. You think it's going to be different there? His eyes darkened. Maybe. Well, I said, rising from my desk. Good luck with that. He hesitated. Are you really not going to give me another chance? I smiled faintly. Goodbye, Ethan. He lingered for a second longer, his eyes searching mine for something that wasn't there anymore. Then he turned and walked out. And this time I didn't watch him go. 2 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my penthouse, sipping champagne when Daniel arrived. He handed me a glass and settled into the chair beside me. The contract with Callahan and Morris went through, I said, glancing at my phone. Official as of this morning. Daniel smiled. You're unstoppable. I know. Daniel's hand brushed against mine. You seem happy, he said. I am. He leaned in closer. So what's next for you? Global expansion, I said easily. We're opening an office in London next quarter. Daniel smiled. Need a date for the ribbon cutting? I'll consider it. Daniel's eyes darkened. Careful. I'm known to be persistent. Good, I replied, smiling. He leaned toward me slowly, his hand brushing my jaw. I let him kiss me. Slowly, deeply. Ethan's memory evaporated beneath Daniel's steady warmth. When he pulled back, Daniel's smile sharpened. I think you're dangerous, he said softly. I think you're right, I replied. The last text from Ethan came 2 days later. Asterisk, I'm sorry. I miss you. Can we talk? Sis. I deleted it without replying. I looked out over the city skyline, feeling nothing but the quiet hum of satisfaction beneath my skin. Ethan had played games. I had played chess. And I had won. The end.